Welcome to Reels on the Rocks, the show where your hosts Whisky and Sweet Tea discuss film from the unpretentious perspective. Today's topic, the cynical indie flick 500 Days of Summer. Please be advised, spoilers are ahead.
Welcome back to Reels on the Rocks for Zoe Deschanel month. Today we're going to be taking a look at 500 Days of Summer. And right off the bat, I just picked this one mostly because summer's about to start, and I just thought it'd be kind of funny timing for us to have something with summer in the title. Right? But so yeah, this one is, I think, the directorial debut for Mark Webb. He might have done some smaller stuff before this, but he went on to do like the Amazing Spider-Man movies. Mm-hmm. And this was a huge indie hit at the time, so it only had a budget of $7.5 million, and it had an international gross of $60 million, so huge hit. This, when it came out, you know, I'm not a huge fan of romantic comedies,
right?
And I'm constantly getting people being like, "You just haven't seen the right one." So like, I'm always getting recommended different ones. I actually watched like a different one within the last month, but back when I was in high school, this was something like a lot of like friends of mine were like, "Oh, if you don't like romantic comedies, you should watch this." And so I checked it out and I enjoyed it quite a bit. And you know, like it was, we talked about this in our last episode, but you know, it was kind of the big Zoe Deschanel boom. And I do still think that it is a good romantic comedy if you don't like romantic comedies.
I wouldn't club it in the comedy category.
Interesting. Well, we'll get into that. Like, actually, I'm kind of curious about your thoughts on it, because I do have another thing I wanted to touch on, but I figured we'd wait until a little later in the review. But just right off the bat, what did you think of it?
I did not like it.
Really?
I didn't. Which is why, like 2 weeks ago, I was like, "Oh, this will be an interesting month."
Well, so why not? Like, what did you think of it? What did you not like about it?
There's a few things I could nitpick. My biggest problem, I think, with this movie is both. I forget, it's either Josh or is it Joseph? Is Joseph Gordon-Levitt?
It's Tom. I wrote it down because Joseph Gordon-Levitt is who I think of, that's the actor. I will actually
come back to that. Joseph Gordon-Levitt's character and Zoe Deschanel's character are so blah in this movie that I was just like, I like, to the point, because I watch these movies with my family, and we literally had just finished watching these movies, and we couldn't even remember what his name was.
That's why I had to write it down. It's Tom. It's funny. I don't think, like, even one of my favorite movies with him in it, Inception, it's like I remember his name is Arthur, but I get you with this movie because I had to write it down for referring to the character, so I wouldn't call him Joseph Gordon-Levitt. It's Tom and Summer.
Tom and Summer.
And I will say, at least I can, well, it's in the title, but I can at least remember Summer's name, partly because she's like, you know, so quirky.
I did like that it was kind of a nice play in that 500 Days of, because I was always like, I was like, is this some kind of weird sci-fi movie where summer lasts 500 days? But it was kind of interesting. That was interesting, but it was just a movie I couldn't really get into. I didn't know enough about Summer to really have an opinion of her about anything. I didn't, obviously until there's reveals later in the movie. I didn't know Tom is kind of, he's the main character. We kind of touch on him more, but a lot of there's stuff about him that I'm just like, well, why? Like, there wasn't enough of me to even be invested in him. And then he kind of is just, at least again, this is just my take, he was just super unlikable. He reminded me of Ross on Friends. He was not a likable guy. And so
I feel like you're going to come away from this review liking it more than you
we'll
did
see.
Going into it. Because again, I have something I'm going to touch on, but keep going, because I don't think we might be agreeing more than you think that we're going to.
So I get the point that, because one of the things I didn't like is I'm like, well, we know nothing about Summer. Like, she leaves the job, and I'm just like, well, why? Why does she leave? They don't really reveal why that happens. And then I get it because it's not her story, it's his story. So I kind of understand that, and I know people have said, because I remember hearing this a lot in college because a lot of my friends like this movie, and they were like, "Oh, it's like deconstructing the pixie dream girl," and I'm like,
No, it is not. It is a pixie dream girl movie. Are you freaking? I kind of get what they're going for,
because I think the way it was explained to me, because, and again, I had no idea what was going on because I'd never seen this until this viewing. My understanding of it was essentially that she's supposed to be blah because he only sees her as perfect, and it's supposed to be why that's a flawed view. But I'm like, the point, I guess, that would have been fine if he had at least been somewhat interesting, or we'd learned more about his like backstory, and you don't. And so it was like watching vanilla meet a different shade of vanilla, and having like nothing super interesting happen between them for like 2 hours.
What I think I liked about it when I was a teenager is that it's kind of a cynic's view on a love story. Because it's and I think that's also why people recommended it to me. Like, obviously this was just super popular with everyone at the time. Like, you can even see that with the gross $60 million. Like, a lot of people liked this movie, and it went on to get the director a directing role in a freaking Spider-Man movie. But I think why people recommended it to me, and I didn't love this movie as a teenager, but I liked it, and I agreed like with people who recommended it to me that it was a good, thanks for telling me
It was
about
like a good
this.
starting point for you for like the
Because
romance.
I'm not a very like I don't like the sort of manufactured like whimsicalness of like romantic movies, and I liked that this was kind of taken to a more reasonable level, and I liked that the one thing I remember winning me over within the first 5 minutes was just showing how absurd Tom is as a character. He's broken up with someone in the first 5 minutes of the movie, and he's like having a freaking mental breakdown, smashing plates, and his like 10-year-old sister has to come in and talk him down. And I thought that was hilarious when I was a teenager, because it really does kind of show this immature sort of like idea of love, like, oh, she was the one I need, I can't live without her. Like, to me, I just found that so funny because it's so absurd to act that way. And it kind of shows that he is not supposed to be like a trustworthy narrator of the events. And I do I guess I'll get into it now. So this movie has been misinterpreted grossly by a lot of the people that came to like it. And one kind of phenomenon on the internet that we have talked about outside of this show, and people know about, is the trademark nice guy. Yeah. And at least in my opinion, I think that type of person has existed forever. We're just kind of now becoming aware of that sort of personality.
We're now realizing that it's a problem.
But I do think that there are some movies that kind of painted it in a more sympathetic light. One of my favorites that I do think actually does a good job making the point that it is not a good way of acting is Just Friends. I don't know if you've seen that movie. Very funny. Not. Maybe we should check it out at some point. It's very funny. Idea. It's Ryan Reynolds also. Ryan Reynolds is super funny, and love Ryan Reynolds. This role, this character Tom, has been misconstrued so much by a bunch of lovesick dudes that Joseph Gordon-Levitt came out a few years ago, and I think he either was interviewed or he wrote an article, but he was talking about how people totally misunderstand the fact that his character is not supposed to be the good guy. And this is the actor, this is Joseph Gordon-Levitt saying he is supposed to be very it's exactly what I just said a second ago about him being so nearly to the point of being mentally ill with the whole building someone up to the point of being so perfect. And that's the point of the movie too. I know Joseph Gordon-Levitt came out and talked about this. I think the director did too, but that is the point of the movie. And going back to it as an adult is funny because one thing they talk about with Tom is how he he saw the end of he saw The Graduate and he thought the ending was the most romantic thing ever. Have you seen The Graduate?
No, I've not seen The Graduate. Personally, we're not really into seeing older people try to seduce younger people,
You
so
should check it out. Just, it's a classic, and that's the point of the movie. But
I
the thing
remember
is,
them
I'm
saying
not
that
gonna.
in the movie though. I remember them saying, and he grossly, misunderstood the ending of The Graduate.
But that's the point. Is like, so I'm not gonna tell you what the ending of The Graduate is. But if someone told me that it is the most romantic thing they've ever seen, I would give them the side eye because it is kind of not that. It's actually sort of a cynical ending. So again, like if a child were to think that way about that movie, that would sort of make me think that they have a very skewed idea of what romance is. And again, like I had seen The Graduate when I was a teenager, but for some reason maybe I just thought that was like funny. But again, like going into like the character as an adult and like hearing that, I'm like, oh boy, yikes. Because that is the point of the movie. Is that he like Summer. It's almost delusional to even think that they would end up together. Like there's that point later in the movie when he's going on a date with a different woman and he's still hung up on Summer, and I felt what his date was feeling because like they're at a diner and he's crying and she, all he's been doing the whole date is talking about Summer. And his date is like, so you got into a relationship with a woman who says that she's not into monogamous relationships and you expected it to go differently. And I was just the same way. I'm like, yeah, like the first time they meet, she's talking about like, oh, I don't believe in love. I don't believe in being with just one person. I don't even believe in boyfriends. Why would you, if you have like that understanding of romance, even want to get into a relationship with that person? And that's kind of again, it's the point of the movie is that he has this very, very like romanticized idea of what a relationship is, like to the point where he almost bases it off of like what a Disney movie understanding
Right.
is, like, oh, you find your special someone and then you're there for them forever.
I
And
think you've brought something up that I had also kind of been thinking about. Um, I remember watching, and I remember when I watched this movie, I'm like, oh my god, is this like an incel manifesto or something? Like,
again, it's like the nice guy idea of what like just be
right.
persistent and eventually she'll fall for you.
And I guess
And
that
again,
kind of plays
I
into
think
the.
my cynical teenager self, like I didn't think about it that much because nice guys weren't such a thing at the time. But again, I think the fact that I'm not like really into romantic movies, I think I got it, but I just thought it was funny. You know what I mean? Like I'm kind of reading into it more as an adult, but again, I think I understood that when I saw it as a kid, and I liked that about it because I thought his character was so ridiculous that I found it funny.
Mm-hmm.
And even like after they sleep together or spend the night or whatever, there's that big silly musical number.
Oh my god! Okay, that was such a cringy scene because I remember watching that and being like, a whole bunch of single men in the audience were just like, yeah, he got some.
Right? It's and again, it's like it's supposed to be funny, but I feel, and again, I don't think that movies turned people into nice guys. I definitely think maybe there was sort of like people at a certain age might have seen the movie and gotten that idea, but I do think that type of person has existed forever. But I do
Again,
think
I
that
agree
there's
with you. I don't think anything's turned into a movie. I think basically a lot of guys saw this movie and be like, "Yeah, that's me. I feel that way." And there's just something. So there's something sort of empowering, whether it's right or wrong in your interpretation of being validated. And so
exactly.
and so again, it's like you and I have personally talked about this with like the Fight Club and everything. And I think that was David Lynch, correct?
No, that was
Oh, I'm sorry.
No. It's oh my god, how am I blanking? They're both David, so you're not far off. It's David.
David what? Anyway, that David, but he came out and said, if you like these people, you do not understand the point of the movie. And
yes, Fincher, David Fincher.
Thank you, David Fincher. So I was just part of it. It was a David. David Lynch is Blue Velvet. But
yes.
Again, it's like you said, sort of the same thing. And I think because at least in school, a lot of what I would recall, and I actually could see this in the movie, and this is we'll get into this later. A lot of the people I went to school with who I would classify as toxic man children listed this as one of their favorite movies.
I think the problem is that the movie attracts the sort of people that are like-minded to Tom's character.
Yeah.
Especially like having Zooey Deschanel as her typical manic pixie dream girl character. I think it attracts a sort of person who doesn't look critically at the movie and they just consume it as like another thing that validates their feelings.
Right.
And I don't think there's anything wrong with that, but I do think that, like, I as I said, I don't think that like nice guys were created by the media, but
right.
I
think the media gave them a label.
Yes, and I do think that there is like people who don't look critically at things, and then like certain characters or themes like validate their own worldview, and they just dig deeper into it. And also like indie movies were kind of, and I say indie in quotation marks, like this was an independent-ish movie. Like $7 million budget isn't a lot, but it is more than like a really, really indie movie.
Right.
And there was like this big boom of quote unquote indie movies. And I remember talking about this with people who weren't like as into movies as me, and they're like, oh, the tropes of indie movies. And I'm like, indie just means independent. There aren't tropes of an indie movie. Right. You could have an indie horror, but it became a genre. Like, and I still think it kind of even persists to this day. Like the one friend I had, it's like, oh, there's like the pregnant love interest, and there's the guy wearing flannels, and there's like the old bands, and it's like, yes, right. There was like this kind of, and that's the thing, like indie shouldn't mean that, but there was this like marketing explosion of this type of movie, and it was brought on by things like Little Miss Sunshine, which is like a really good movie, but there was just this, you know, just tons of movies like made on a tiny budget of like, you know, star-crossed like alternative lifestyle lovers doing stuff and it not really having much of a point, and it,
yeah, people
bought it, and Hollywood took notice, and it became a genre, even though it wasn't really a genre.
Because did you ever watch American Dad? Like this, like the show. I'm sorry, I don't know why. I think you have. Right?
We've talked about this all the time. I like It's like the only one of Seth MacFarlane's shows that I don't get like irritated by. I do think, like, I haven't seen any new episodes, but I do think it's getting to that point where they should probably end it before it gets too overdone. But
the point was they did an episode kind of lampooning this whole independent movie thing, and you know what's ironic is when you talk about the stereotypical independent movie sort of thing, those I just have never been able to get behind them because I feel like I'm kind of watching people do nothing for 2 hours, and that's literally what they did in an episode called Independent Movie. That's basically what happens, and it's just to kind of satirize this whole, like you said, this whole quote unquote genre of flannel wearing people doing nothing for 2 hours. It's like, it's such a good satire that I don't even like it because I'm like, this sucks.
It's the fact that my friend who wasn't as like tuned in as I am, like, would think of it as a genre where there are tropes and stuff like that. It really just kind of speaks to what I was talking about, how Hollywood took notice of like this type of movie that seemed to speak to certain like young people who kind of like, you know, vintage things and, you know, romance stories, and, you know,
the feeling like a part of not like other guys,
or not like other girls. I mean, tons of women liked this movie too. In fact, actually, the person who recommended this to me when I was a teenager was a woman. You know, so it's not just men who
that's actually pretty ironic, because I actually kind of felt, and again, when you explain it to me more about what the point of it is, it makes more sense. Because I remember watching this and just being, this is like a super misogynistic movie.
Well, and speaking, we talked a little bit about the manic pixie dream girl thing, character archetype, and like we talk about nice guys. I do kind of think that that type of character archetype actually contributed to the not like other girls thing. That's a different sort of toxic mindset where it's like, oh, I'm quirky, so I'm better than you, kind of thing. It's another
Yeah.
like internet phenomenon, and it's not Zoe Deschanel's fault, but I
Right.
do think that a lot of young girls who grew up watching her on New Girl or in these movies kind of got this thing where it's like, oh, guys will like me more if I like old bands and stuff like that. You know what I
Which
mean? Or like,
if they genuinely do, that's fine. But it's like don't create a
well,
persona based on what you
well,
see.
and even if they genuinely do, it creates this sort of like fighting sort of thing where it's like, oh, I like all of these things I like, which makes me more interesting than you. Like
Yeah.
it's not like the whole not like other girls thing isn't necessarily like fake. Like these women really do like these things, but they think that it makes them like more desirable, and that's the problem. You
Yeah.
know what I mean? Like it's kind of like me saying like I like horror movies, so I'm a cooler guy or something like that. It's just stupid, and it's not even like a girl thing. Like you see on the internet people talking about how their music taste is better because they listen to like classic rock or something, and it's like, oh, I was born in the wrong
And
generation.
then it goes from being not like other guys or girls, and then it kind of transitions into gatekeeping, and it's just a downward spiral from there.
Well, and it's not even like these indie movies really attracted like it did. It wasn't like movie fans really liked these. It attracted hipsters, is what it did, and that's why like the early 2010s that was like a thing. Like hipsters were like a thing that people still talked about, and it was because of like people that like. And again, I don't think there's anything wrong with liking this movie. I just think it's funny you bring up Fight Club. It's exactly the same sort of thing because both Summer and Tom are not perfect people. Like I would probably be friends with Summer, but it's sort of like if she took a liking to me at work, I'd just shut it down because it's like we're different people.
Well,
You don't like.
well, that brings up an interesting thing because you said they're not perfect people. I can definitely see how Tom is not perfect. One of my biggest issues, though, was I don't know. You never find out enough about Summer for me, except for the thing where she says that where we find out that she's engaged, and that.
Well, it's her quirks. All you know about her is all of her quirks.
Right,
Oh,
but
she's the kind of
not a
girl that'll go into a
personality.
porn shop and buy a porn movie that you guys can recreate later. She's the sort of person to go into IKEA and play house with you and the different things. She's the sort of girl who likes Bruce Springsteen's old songs. Like that's all you know about Summer. And again, it kind of goes into like the idea of like getting into Tom's head where it's not like he's in love with the person, he's in love with the idea of the person.
Right.
Like I don't think he really gets to know Summer very well.
Well, and I think what's her face? I forget his little sister at the end. I forget what her name is.
And that actress is awesome, by the way. She's so funny. She was also in Kick Ass. She's great. And I wish I had written her name down. She's fantastic.
Well, like when
But she
that ending when she was like, oh, I didn't see that. I saw all the bad stuff. Maybe she remember that. And I kind of get where they were going with that. Where this whole time we were only seeing, quote unquote, for the most part, the good parts of the relationship. That irritated me to no end, and I will tell you why. Because okay, you never watched the show Dallas, right?
No,
So
I'm aware of it. I know how
you know,
big of a
yeah.
thing it was in the '80s, but
So
no, I did not watch
it
it.
became infamous for many reasons. One of them is where they did a whole season where a whole lots of junk went down, and then
Oh, the dream. It was all a dream.
and then they
Yeah.
start the next season. Oh, it was a dream, and that's kind of how I felt when she goes. When I spent like 2 hours or whatever watching this whole this, and I get the point of it, but it's just I don't want to feel like I wasted 2 hours of my time building up this trying to understand this relationship when it turns out it was never being presented fairly in the first place. Like I kind of wish that there'd been something along those lines that had been said earlier in the movies, maybe not as directly, but I just do you understand what I mean? I'm just like, I don't like feeling like when I watch a movie that like I've wasted 2 hours of my time, not because necessarily because I didn't like it, but just because it turns out everything you were told was a lie. This is how it actually was. And
I don't. I think I know why you feel that way. I don't like. First of all, they definitely showed bad times. There's the whole breakup section of the 500 days. There's the whole time when he tried to be a macho man defending her at the bar, and it ended up turning. There was there
that was like
there
such
was
a gross scene.
there was the bit where he's like trying to kind of reenact one of their earlier dates, and she's not receptive. Like, it does show the bad times, but one thing I'm a little critical of it now is the fact that we're told, like, we're shown all of the days out of order.
Mm-hmm.
And this is a storytelling technique I think can be really good. You know,
I don't think it was done
Pulp
well
Fiction
here.
is yeah, exactly. Pulp Fiction does it really well. We talked about Memento last year. With this movie, it's like, what does telling it out of order do for us? Like, we could have gotten the same information watching it chronologically.
Yeah. It was
but
it kind of was almost felt like, and again, I'm going to keep referencing my family because we watched this all together.
Yeah.
My dad has always referred to, during specific Oscar years, because we always watch the Oscars, except for this past year because we had no idea what was going on. But there's some movies that will like win, and my dad will be like, that's a gimmick movie. And I'm like, what do you mean? He's like, it's not necessarily good or bad. It's just different. It has a gimmick, and people really like the fact that it had a gimmick. And so, like, for example, The Artist, the whole thing was that it was mostly silent. And
True.
And people have said later, well, it was kind of, at least if it had been released in the silent film era, it wouldn't be as well received as it is now.
I don't know, man. That one was really good. It's not, the problem is it's not one I really ever feel like rewatching. Sometimes I'm like, oh, maybe I should. Sometimes I can get into it. Like, one that I will fully admit is a gimmick movie, but it was my favorite of that year, was Birdman.
Oh, to where it all looks like it's one take.
Exactly. And it was such a cool new thing that everyone copied afterwards. And I enjoyed the story because it was about someone who's desperately trying to be recognized as an artist instead of like a Hollywood actor. So I liked that aspect of it. I won't say that it is like the greatest film of all time, and it's definitely a gimmick movie because everyone copied it afterwards, and you could make an argument that there's no reason for it to be one continuous take, quote unquote.
Yeah.
But I know what your dad's talking about because that happens. But I do think, like, if the gimmick's done well enough,
like La La Land did that too with its
supposed.
Well, but I think I haven't seen Pulp Fiction, but and I know that sounds really bad, sorry, but from what I at least understand is it doesn't just serve as a gimmick; it has an actual purpose.
Well, and also the thing about Pulp Fiction is it almost feels like an anthology movie because you could take it's almost like a bunch of short stories. So the fact that it's out of order doesn't really matter, and by the end of the movie, where it all makes sense, where it all comes together, like, it makes sense by the end of the movie. So, like, that's one where it does serve the movie. Like, that's the big question when there's a gimmick. What did it do to add to the story? And I kind of admit Birdman, it doesn't necessarily fit into the theme of anything. It's just a cool way of doing the movie. This is the same thing because I like this movie, but this is something I'm going to be critical of. Why was it out of order? There's no reason for it to be. You could have told me all of the same information chronologically, and I would have still had the same idea of their relationship. Telling it,
I was kind of like the same way about this, because like I was thinking about it, I was trying to think, is there a reason why it's out of order? And I was like, there are some scenes, and it doesn't happen all the time, it's happened a couple times, where they would put, like, the one I remember the most is the IKEA scene where they're having fun at IKEA, and then that's like day 30 or something, and then don't totally like criticize me. I don't remember what exactly the day numbers are, but like that was
I didn't write it down either. It's not important. You shouldn't have to remember exactly what day.
Basically,
it was.
Early in their relationship, they go to IKEA and they have a good time, and then while they're there, then all of a sudden it jumps ahead to day later in their relationship, and he's sad at IKEA. So though in that particular instance, like I was like trying to be like, okay, so he's revisiting these places and it's not this. It didn't need to happen, but I could kind of see what they were doing. But for the most part, I was just like, but why though?
And with that though, like it's actually reversed. You see him sad first, and you wonder why, and then a few scenes later, like I think almost like 20 minutes later, they eventually go back and you see like the beginning of their relationship. But again, it's like, what does that add? I still get that their relationship didn't go well. Like the epiphany of like, oh, he was trying to reenact something earlier. Like it didn't do anything.
Well, and then
like,
my other thing was because I like to do like what I call with I call it the DVD test, where am I going to get a majority of the point of a movie out of if I had just gone to the theater and seen this once? Because technically the movie genre, it's supposed to operate under the idea that you will get as much as you possibly can out of one sitting. And I feel like with a lot of it being told out of order, a lot of it was supposed to reference things that we'd seen earlier, but so much time had elapsed between them jumping around that I feel like a lot of that was lost. The only reason I remember the IKEA one was just because it was IKEA, and it was pretty obvious that it was IKEA.
You know what I noticed also? I think I saw this one before I saw last week's episode, Yes Man, but like, it's one thing I did not remember that I thought was kind of jarring when I saw this was just how, you know, to say what you will about Tom, his friends were. Yeah, dude, especially the one that couldn't get a girlfriend was like, dude, you think like Tom has problems? That man is like never going to get a girlfriend. He's so toxic.
I know.
And it's like funny to me because this is supposed to be like the indie comedy. This is the one that's like more in touch with emotions than mainstream comedies, and yet the mainstream comedy that came out in the same year was much more sensitive than this movie.
I was actually gonna say that is because I wanted to bring this up because I was actually kind of shocked that this one came across again because I'm going by like what I'd seen in trailers. This one came across as so bro-y. And
it's funny, right? It's almost like you shouldn't go by trailers because they try and market it to certain people. Yeah, man, I agree. It's crazy. This one, I did not remember it too. Maybe because I was a teenager, but when I was watching it, I was just like, "Holy crap!" His friends are pieces of work. Well, like he's got his own shit, but like,
we had the one who couldn't get a girlfriend, who was incredibly misogynistic, homophobic, I think even transphobic in some scenes, and I was like, and I was like,
he's a whole cavalcade of problems.
It was kind of funny because he actually looked like one of my cinematography professors. It was total opposite, but so we had him, and then we had I call him Spencer. I forget what his name was because he's the same actor played Spencer on Criminal Minds for like ever.
Gotcha.
He was the one with the longer hair.
And he also was pretty toxic.
Yeah,
but
he's
like,
pretty toxic too, but at least
he wasn't as bad. Like the thing with him was like he'd been dating the same girl since high school. Like it was almost like it's almost right?
It's almost yeah. Actually,
you had the one who could never get a date to save his life. You had the one who's been dating the same girl forever, and then you have like the lovesick person who has like bad relationships over and over again.
Right.
You know. But yeah, like the one who couldn't get a date is the one who was like shockingly offensive, like to the point where again, it's just funny that this was supposedly like the quote unquote like emotional comedy. Like it's so funny that the more mainstream comedy was a lot more sensitive towards things than this one was, and this was like the indie movie that all the like artsy people would have been like, oh yeah, this is so much better. I thought that was so funny.
I agree with you on that. I like again. I was watching it. And I was like, you would kind of. They were. They kind of reminded me of like The Devil Wears Prada, which was about 2 years I think before this one, where her friends just sucked in that movie. Her friends were awful. They were like, she does good at work. You're a terrible person for forgetting your boyfriend's birthday. You're changing. You're this. Like they made her feel bad for trying to get ahead at work. And it was and so they were toxic. Now these people were toxic in different ways. But I'm like, was this like a late first decade of 2000 things where everybody just had sucky friends?
Dude, the 2000s are like the trash of like it's one of the worst decades. 2000 to 2010 is like one of the trashiest decades ever. Like there's been this trend on YouTube of like people going back to like dating shows like Next and Room
Oh
Raiders,
my
and it is
god.
so funny to see what passed back then. Like
Not
it was
everything was
ooh.
bad. Penelope came out back then, and that was a winner in our books.
I mean, tons of stuff came out, but as far as like mainstream
Yeah.
pop culture, it was so very different from what it's like today.
I didn't get a chance to, but one of my girlfriends from, and not girlfriend in that way, but one of my girlfriends from college, she had a poster of this on her room, and she's like a very, into like, the way women are portrayed in media and all that sort of stuff. And I didn't get a chance to. I wanted to, but I wanted to try to call her before this and be like, hey, do you still, now that things have kind of on certain topics have shifted since we were in college, how do you still feel the same way about this movie where you want to have a poster up about it? I mean, not to judge her or anything, but I just kind of wanted to see what her take on it was, because she's
As
somebody...
I said, this was very popular with women at the time
right.
too. Like this was, and I will say, I don't think that this was necessarily. I don't think like Zoe Deschanel or any of the other women in the movie had, and maybe that's why a lot of the other things in the movie aren't put, like people don't think about it so much, because I don't think that women are portrayed poorly in the movie. I don't think
they're
that
not.
there's
The
a
men just
sexist
suck.
depiction of women. I think there are sexist characters,
Yeah,
like his friends and stuff, but I don't think any of the women are like
the only
made
thing
out in a sexist way. Also, I don't think this movie really uses the male gaze that much. I don't think there's a lot of like zooming in on people's body parts.
The only thing I can think of, and it's kind of excusable because of what it's used for, is it happens at the beginning and towards the end when it's just like panning over her body and it's talking about, oh, I love this about her, I love this, but which from his perspective, with him being as toxic as he is, that makes sense. And then at the end he's like, I hate her knees, I hate the way her eyes look, I hate this birthmark. But it was, that's the only thing I would consider male gaze, like this kind of slow panning over her body, but for the purpose it served, it was excusable, I guess, is what I was saying.
Yeah, and that's one where like, I'm sure everyone has a different male gaze. Is more like a woman bends over and the camera has a close up on her butt. You know what I mean?
Okay.
And there's not really a lot of, I don't think there's any of that in this movie. And like when it's slow panning over her, like it's him being hopeless romantic Tom talking about like, oh, I love her. Like it's different. Like male gaze, and I'm not an expert, I'm sure if you're if you're listening to this on YouTube, feel free to say so in the comments. But like from my understanding, it's more sexualized and objectification. You know what I mean? Like, oh man, look at that. It's again like it's. The reason it's called the male gaze is it's sort of like appealing to men and what they tend to look for, look at, like if they're objectifying a woman, like what they're looking at.
Got it.
And there's none of that in this movie. And again, I don't think that this movie has any sexist attitudes towards women, so I think that's part of the reason they let it slide. And I also think women probably got the message more than a lot of the men watching this about Tom's character.
Yeah.
Because, and that's the thing too. Like I feel like, again, with the the way people are on the internet and with incels and nice guys and all these people, like I also feel like some people watching this movie would hear Summer's character talking about how she doesn't want to be monogamous, and that would lead to these people talking about like, oh, see, all women are hypergamous and all this other stuff. It's like, which again, like for me, I don't have a lot of sympathy for Tom, because again, the person I felt was channeling my thoughts watching this movie was his date, talking about, so she told you what she was about and you still pursued it, and then you felt sad when it went the way she explained that it would go. It's like, it's like if I love chocolate cake and I'm dating a girl who's allergic to chocolate, and that's like a deal breaker in my mind. It's kind of like, why would you think that it would work?
Well, and also that whole scene with that date, and again, that kind of again plays into how toxic his character is when she's done with him. She's like, I'm just leaving. And I think he like calls her ugly or something, or I don't know if he says calls her ugly, but he yells something at her as she's leaving, like, that's right, keep walking, you weren't worth it anyway, or something like that. When the one person who's giving him a reality check at this point in the movie leaves.
Ugh. And we might as well get into the ending too,
Oh,
because that's something I could see getting
yes.
misconstrued as well. Because the cool thing is that they do both learn something. Like, because Summer learns that she does actually, like, that was his whole thing, right? Is fate is real. You will meet the person that you're going to spend the rest of your life with, and it will, like, it could happen. And it
So,
happens to Summer. Like, she doesn't believe in that, but she's just like reading a book in a diner, and some guy says he likes the book, and they start a conversation, and a year later they're getting married. And Tom doesn't get angry about this by the end. Like, he is until they talk. Like, when they talk it out, he's fine. But that's also kind of like, it goes into the whole nice guy thing of seeing the world purely from your perspective as a
right.
protagonist of your own story, because it's like that was her love story, like that she found the right guy. And also that little line that she has of like, it's I felt with him what I wasn't sure of with you.
Right.
And
And
that's actually really sweet. But I could see someone with a much more selfish mindset being like, "Oh, you
of
just
course
you
she
just
figures
strung
it
me
out.
along," or
Yeah,
something.
but of course she'd figure it out after she leaves me or something like that.
Exactly.
Well, and
And
also, well, since we're getting into the ending, again, since I watched this with like three other people, there were actually we had several different interpretations of the ending, and I was gonna we'll finish what we're saying, but I was like I wanted to talk about before you tell me what your interpretation is, what our takeaway was, because it was interesting how these people on the same couch had different interpretations of the ending.
yeah, go for it. I'm curious.
So first off, this is one of the favorite things. My little brother and my mom watched this with me. My dad got bored and left about halfway through, which is weird because he's the one that's always into romantic movies. My mom actually isn't. It's like we had the whole gender swap thing. But so my little brother said that he hated the entire movie until the last 20 minutes, but he hates that he likes the last 20 minutes because he wouldn't have liked it if he hadn't seen the rest of the movie. So for him, it was like a catch 22. My mom said that she's like, at the end of the movie, he's learning that he can't be he can't, because we have the narrator talking, he can't be as into this whole idea of fate and fairy tales as naive as he was before. And so he's learned from that. So he's a little cautious this time, but he's still open to it. He didn't shut himself off entirely after Summer didn't work out. My interpretation was that he didn't learn anything at all. And I'll tell you why I say that. It's actually kind of interesting. And he's just going to keep doing what he did with Summer. And the reason I say that is because they named the girl that he runs into. Her name is Autumn. And so they're like, oh, that was just kind of a cute sort of fun thing. I'm like, no, I think they did that on purpose to show that it's a cycle that's going to continue. That's kind of what my interpretation was, is that he didn't really he's going to continue to be this toxic man child in his relationships, whatever they may be. So those are so we had different. I interpreted it as he's staying exactly the way he is. Autumn will essentially just be a new season in his life. And my mom thought it was, he had learned, but he's not as naive as he was the first time. So those were our two different interpretations. What do you think?
So I have two different not interpretations, but like, so I have an interpretation for the real ending, and then I have an interpretation for the Hollywood ending. So the whole bit with him meeting Autumn,
Mm-hmm.
it's sequel bait. That's all it was. I would freaking guarantee that that was probably even added in after a test screening that went really well, and the executives were like, oh, this is probably going to do really well financially, so we should tease that maybe we'll make a second one of these. That's literally all I think the whole Autumn thing was. And I even remember when I saw it in 2009 thinking, oh, cool, I'd like to see the next one. And I literally think that's all that was. For where it should have ended before his job interview, I kind of agree with your mom. Pretty much what I would say is that Summer and him are foil characters, using that fancy literary analysis side of my brain. Because they're opposites. She at the beginning was very cynical, didn't believe in true love, kind of a dark kid. Like when you talk, like her backstory of her cutting her hair off and feeling nothing and liking that she felt
Yeah,
nothing. And all
that
these
was
other,
a little off-putting.
yeah. So like, and him being like a hopeless romantic, they are literally foil characters. They are like opposites of each other. And I think learned the opposite lesson. And that's where I think you and your mom and I have the same reading of it, where she learned that fate can exist and she does like true love, and he learned that, like he should be more hopeful. Like he doesn't need to latch on to people the way that he has, like because you're always going through life and you never know what's going to happen, and
Right.
the next girl you meet might be the girl you end up marrying. And I think, like, again, like, he doesn't get angry at Summer after she explains why she got married, because he kind of learned, like, oh yeah, like, it's not all about me. um and that's why I feel like the other ending was tacked on, is like, because I if like, even if it's not a cynical Hollywood decision, I do think it was more of a playful one. And that
Got it.
would be
Okay.
kind of the reason to see the sequel, is like, oh, is he going to do it again? Is he going to turn her into his obsession, or is he going to treat it differently? Is he going to, like that?
Do you know what's interesting is, to me, the added scene was the whole exposition at the end where she's like, I learned that fate does exist. To me, that felt added in.
Interesting.
It's just, I don't know why, just something about it just seemed, in a movie where they spent so little time explaining anything. That's not true. Where they spent so little time really talking about characters, like why they made choices that ended up where they are. Then all of a sudden we have her decide to be like, well, actually, I learned this from you. To me, something about it just felt out of place. But like I said, I could be wrong. Maybe I'm being the
Well,
cynical one here.
it's because, like, and who knows, maybe it was, but like, I think the reason is because, if you write that into the script as a screenwriter, like, obviously the audience is going to wonder why this person who said that she doesn't even believe in monogamous she's essentially polyamorous, so why would she settle down with one guy? You kind of owe the audience an explanation. Like, because at that point I feel like a lot of people would kind of, even if they understand that Tom is a bit of a piece of work, I do think that that would be a little bit upsetting, to be like, well, wait a second, she, like, why is she being such a hypocrite? So I do think that that's there, and I think it's also kind of I feel like her lesson is more of the heart of the movie, because it really, like, again, like, her little story of how she met her husband is really kind of shockingly, like, it
Right.
really is
It's
just
it's
like, you
shocking.
never
It's
know when you're going
shockingly
to run into the
sweet.
person.
It's sweet and very kind of along the lines of what we would expect to see in a romantic movie. And so you're right. It is sort of. I do think her story is the point of the movie, and I don't know. I don't know why I said that. Maybe I don't think that. I'm kind of confused now.
It's, again, like, the everyone involved in the making of the movie was very clear with the fact that Tom is not supposed to be, the handsome, charming man that, like, he is supposed to be a mess. Like, the fact that the actor, Joseph Gordon-Levitt, had to come out and, like, talk about how so many people have misconstrued the
You
character.
toxic man children! Stop using me as your MySpace profile pictures.
Right. The fact that the people who wrote and made the movie had, like, a very solid understanding of what was wrong with his character, like, it does sort of lend credence to the idea that there was a point to him being that way, and there was a point to him being the character that you
Right.
see. It almost, again, like, if you don't go through this movie expecting it to back up your preconditioned worldview of things and romance and the world, like, you can see where he went wrong, and you can learn from. In fact, I feel like that, again, is kind of the point of her telling her story, is like, a lot of people going into this would be probably on his side, even if they don't like a lot of the stuff he did. Again, like, it does come off as hypocritical and almost kind of selfish for her to, like, completely change her attitude on romance. So the fact that she explains that it wasn't planned and that it was literally just kind of fate, that she met this dude in a diner randomly and they hit it off so well that they got married shortly after, it really, like, it's meant to, like, give him hope, but it's also supposed to kind of for the audience, for the sort of people who maybe that's happened to, where you're just devastated by a breakup or something. It's like, you never know. You might meet the person you fall in love with tomorrow. It might be 10 years from now, but
I'm just reminded of that this line from Friends where Rachel tells Ross, he's like, Ross, that wasn't a life-changing event, that was barely an experience. That's kind of how I felt about their sort of relationship. It's like, and again, it's because of the way he is, but it's like, I'm just like, it's like he's devastated, and I'm like, at what though? Like, no one even, like, you guys never really used the word boyfriend, girlfriend. You were kind of more just, like, people who hung out together and occasionally hooked up.
For a short time, they were official. Like,
Okay.
I think it's after the bit where he punches the guy in the bar, and she's like, and he gets mad at her for getting mad at him, and then eventually, for a period of time, maybe it was like 20 days or something, but like they were officially a couple for a while. But yeah, like, and here's the thing, like, this movie, like, I guess we're getting kind of close to the end of the review, but like, I honestly feel like I still like it. I like it less than I did when I was a teenager, partly because I've seen more romantic comedies I like better than this one. I think a lot of its popularity was bolstered by this obsession with the indie genre, quote unquote.
Mm-hmm.
And I think a lot of people that saw this movie and maybe even loved it, like, probably, like, unless they're still watching it all the time, maybe they've grown out of it. Like, I kind of would be curious, like, if any of you listening
that's
really liked this movie and maybe even clicked on this review because it's one of your favorite movies of all time. Have you watched it recently? And if not, maybe check it out again, because I don't hate it. Like, revisiting it as an adult, like, I definitely see what they were trying to do with this movie. The places where I feel like it's a little bit not as good as I remember it are things like it being told out of order. I don't think that was necessary.
And his friends.
I feel like some of the humor hasn't aged super well. But the things that I liked about it are still things I like about it now. I like the fact that Tom is a mess. Like, I still find it funny. Your introduction to him is having a mental breakdown over breaking up with someone. Like, it's a perfect intro into his character. And I also like that the movie does start with the disclaimer that this is not a love story. Because it's kind of, and I guess you're supposed to kind of wonder what that means, but what it means by the end is that they don't end up together.
Is it a story about Tom learning to love himself? Just kidding.
Well, what it means, because obviously that's put there as like an intriguing thing to make you
as your hook. It's your
movie.
hook, yeah.
Exactly, but by the end of the movie, you understand. Oh, it's because they don't end up together. But like, it's a story about love. But it's not a love story between two characters falling in love. It's a story about what is love, what is a healthy relationship, and what is unhealthy, what is obsession, and that sort of thing. But that's the thing. I feel like it was extra popular at the time because of the whole indie movie craze. I don't think it would be as popular today. It might be with certain types of people. Mm-hmm. It's funny, like, how that sort of style of movie has gone away. Like, you really, like, when you see indie movies now, it's more like A24 and sort of these artistic, sort of like super thought, like, it's a different
what's interesting is I think
landscape of filmmaking these days, and it's really interesting.
You really got me to go see, you really pushed me, and I did, and I went and saw it at 8 a.m. at the former ArcLight Theater, the Lighthouse, and that was like the first like indie movie that when I think of it, an indie movie, that's like what I would think of, that I actually enjoyed. And it's it's interesting. It's a movie I didn't even understand, but I liked it anyway.
Yeah, and that's like, I almost call it like art house experimental. Like, this whole time this whole like period of time where these types of movies were called indie movies have almost tainted that word to mean a specific type of genre. And it's like, if I say indie, what I mean is independent, like not tied to a studio. But if I say that to someone else, they might take it as this kind of movie.
Right.
And
because to me, that's
where,
all an independent movie was. It was a movie that didn't necessarily it didn't originate inside a studio. It may have somehow through the distribution or something have gotten put out by a studio, but it was produced without essentially the help of a studio. Like which ironically, the most successful independent movie of all time in the purely independent film kind of way that we're talking about was My Big Fat Greek Wedding.
Yes, that's a amazing success story. Also, a really good romantic comedy. That's another one
I love that one.
Like. Yeah, and also like a lot of real indie movies, like kind of people forget about. Like Napoleon Dynamite is another one that's super successful. But it doesn't fall into that category of like, ooh, here's the bearded guy in the
Jojo
flannel,
Rabbit,
like with the
Jojo Rabbit. I think was one too. I think that was an independent. I think it was picked up for distribution. I don't think it was produced by a studio. I could be wrong though.
It was Fox Searchlight, so they bought it afterwards. But it is also Taika Waititi, and he's got a draw to him, so he probably had more money to it. But anyway, right. Like the point is, like, I feel like there was kind of this almost intoxicating sort of like aura around these types of movies that made everyone just go gaga over them, to the point where there were so many of them. I don't even remember all of them because most of them are really forgettable. And I literally think it bolstered this film's popularity. And I wonder, like a lot of people, I assume your friend and I assume people that have posters and say it's their favorite movie of all time probably do watch it more frequently. But I posed this earlier and I still pose it, like, anyone who's listening, if you remember liking this movie but haven't seen it in a while, go check it out. Like, I guess that's actually my recommendation for this movie, because I am kind of curious if it holds up to other people. Yeah, I want to know if it holds up to other people, because to me it sort of does. I'd say this is like a C+, but I don't think like it's amazing. And it's also like I get why I liked it as a teenager, and I get why I still like it, because it is still like a good movie for people who are like cynical about romance. Like, I feel like probably at the time I was probably more on Zooey Deschanel's side, like, whatever, like, but for people who are a little bit not so tuned into that whole mindset, I do think it's good. But yeah, so what about you? Like, as I said, for me, it's more of a recommend. If this was like, if you've never seen this, check it out. If you're not so into like romantic comedies or romance movies, I do think that it might be good for you. I guess, but I really am interested for people who really liked this when it came out, if it still holds up, because for me it kind of does, but it's still like almost kind of a relic of its time.
I'm gonna say pass on this one, and the reason is not because of, like I said, that it's not because of what we talked about with the toxicity and the man-childness. That's not why I'm saying that. I'm saying pass because when I watched it, like I just said, the characters were just so boring to me.
Well, you watched it with your family and no one liked it except your little brother. So part of the reason I'm curious if it would even, he said, wonder if this was released today, would it be?
He said he hated the whole movie except the last 20 minutes, and he could not have liked the last 20 minutes without the parts of the movie he hated.
Well, that's part of the reason, like I said, I'm curious if this were released today. I don't think it would have done as well. I really think it's a relic of its time.
Which is interesting for me because, I have a history with, movies that are considered relics of their time, that I'm like, no, yes, this is amazing. But for this one, and I guess, and I think there's, like, I think as you said sort of in the last episode, I think that there's more movies that have kind of taken this approach and kind of tackled the kind of cynical view of love story and kind of challenged the traditional gender roles in romantic movies that have done it better. And that I think that we could look at to learn from more than this. So that's why I'm gonna give this one a pass. That.
Oh no, I'm kidding.
You're like, friendship over, podcast canceled, never again.
Nah, some of your other passes have upset me more than this one. I totally understand. Again, this is only like a kind of medium pass for me, or not pass, medium recommendation for me, because I like it, but I don't love it. Like
Right.
I kind of like what I said last week about Yes Man. It's like there are better ones out there,
Right. And yeah,
you know,
and there are, yeah, and you're absolutely right, there are.
Well, and here, I'll even mention this if anyone wants us to review this in the future. One that was always recommended to me as well, since I don't like romantic comedies, was Crazy Stupid Love, and I watched that fairly recently, and that's one I could talk.
Oh, I think my
about,
older brother, I think, likes that movie. I think.
I am going to hold off on my opinions unless people want me to talk about it, because I have a lot of negative and positive opinions about it, but I will tweet at us and we will review that. But with that, thank you guys for chilling with us.
Be sure to subscribe.
Yeah, subscribe. Check our other episodes out on Spotify or whatever you listen to. And yeah, thanks for chilling with us for about an hour. And I hope you guys drank some nice beverages as well.
I had iced tea. I stayed true to my character name.
I've been trying to be healthy, so I'm drinking water.
You know, we'll get you light whiskey next time.
Ha.
Anyway, we'll see you guys in the next one.
Stay thirsty.
Reels on the Rocks is a production of La Prince Laboratories. It is edited and produced by Alejandro Castillo and features original artwork by Asa Esparza and original music by Pat Mars. Follow us on Twitter at Reels on the Rocks and tweet at us with any movies or topics you'd like us to discuss in the future.